Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. My name is Alberta. Welcome to my channel. Today I'll be answering 3 most frequently asked questions, so stay tuned. Whenever I meet people, they're very curious and they always want to know why I moved to Canada, when I moved to Canada, and how I moved to Canada. If I were to answer these 3 questions in one sentence, it would be I moved to Canada from the Congo, Kinshasa, as a government-sponsored refugee. That sentence alone should tell you a lot about myself. Okay, another thing also, there are 2 types of refugees, at least the ones that I know. There's a government-sponsored refugee and private-sponsored refugee. Private-sponsored refugees, I mean, just like the term, man. Churches sponsor refugees, individuals sponsor other refugees, but for government sponsored refugees, it means that for my case, the Canadian government sponsored my family for us to move to Canada. And so after a year, after landing in Canada, my family had to reimburse the ticket money. So we worked, we reimbursed, and that's it. However, I'm going to go a little bit into some details that will help you understand why I moved to Canada and hopefully answer all your questions. And so from now on, if someone asks me this question, I'll just tell them, go to my YouTube channel and then you'll see the answer. Anyways, so if you are familiar with, especially if you studied international studies or if you did political science, maybe you heard about the African Great Lakes region. And so if you should be aware that there is conflict in the African Great Lakes region, and that conflict happens in the eastern part of my country. So my family lived in the eastern part of my country in a city called Bukavu. Because of the conflict, my family was forced to leave my country to Rwanda for some time. We stayed in Rwanda for 3 weeks and then we moved to Kenya. And when we moved to Kenya, we did not automatically become refugees. My parents always hoped to return back home. There was always this belief that the war was going to end sooner. However, this was not the case. Unfortunately, this war started in 1996 and it's still ongoing. My dad was a student. He was studying in the USA when the war started. And the same day we arrived in Kenya from Kigali, from Rwanda, was the same day my dad arrived in Kenya from the USA. We had no communication whatsoever because back home, when the rebels entered in the city, they cut off communication, electricity, water, everything was shut down. And we just believed that it was God's way of putting us together as a family. Some people would say coincidence, but I just think that it was God's will. So we met in Kenya. We did not meet at the airport. We landed at the same time, but different planes, of course. We were from Rwanda, he was from the USA. We landed in the same airport, the Jomo Kenyatta airport. And once we landed, my mom was like, oh, we should go to the Methodist guest house, because both my parents worked with the United Methodist Church. Even before I was born, they've always worked with them until 2010. So my mom, she was like, okay, now we're in a country where we don't know anyone. Let's look for something familiar. And it was the United Methodist guest house. So we boarded a cab. Canada, we say a cab. In Africa, we say taxi. So we took a taxi to the United Methodist guest house. That same time, my dad also took a taxi, have in mind that we had no communication whatsoever. And he was going to book a room in the United Methodist guest house, UMC guest house. So when we arrived at the guest house, my youngest brother, so my dad, he was very traumatized. He was the most traumatized because of the war. So we thought he was hallucinating, because we knew that Dad was in the States and we were in Kenya. And then he kept on saying, "Papa, Papa." And we were like, my mom said, "Alberta, go watch your brother. Something's wrong with him, but he'll calm down." And my mom kept telling him, "Close your mouth. This is not America. This is Nairobi. Your dad is not here." And he kept saying, "Papa, Papa." So when my mom went to book the rooms, she went inside and we were still outside with the luggages. So he started running towards another taxi, and then I started running after him. And then all of a sudden, I saw him running and tap a man's shoulder. Then the man turned. It was my dad. It was really God's way of bringing us together. And then from there, we did not settle immediately in Kenya because, like I said, we always thought we were going to go back home. So we had no plan of staying in Kenya. Unfortunately, with time, things became challenging. And as human beings, we needed a social support system. And at that time, the only institution that could provide both protection and social support system was the UN. So my parents registered my family under the UN, and they explained their case, and thank God we got approved. And so the UN gave us some IDs, and now we officially became refugees. But before that, we were just externally displaced people. Now, one thing that most people don't get is that not all refugees live in camps. Not all refugees are, because every time when I say that I moved to Canada as a refugee, the first thing that people think is, "Have you lived in a camp before?" No, thank God, I was fortunate not to live in a camp. My parents did their best. They did everything they could for us to live. We lived in the slums, in the ghettos of the ghettos. We lived in Kawangware, but not in the camp, which is, if you ask me, it's way better than living in the camps, because we made friends with people who lived in the camps, and the experience was worse than ours. So not all refugees live in camps. Just know that some refugees work. They rent a home, like my parents rented a 2-bedroom house for the 6 of us, but it was better than living in a tent and whatnot. Okay, once you become a refugee, you have access to a program called a resettlement program. A resettlement program is a program in which the UN can transfer you to another country different from where you got your refugee status. However, not everyone gets that opportunity. You have to explain your case. You have to prove that, yes, you can be, your case is valid for you to be transferred into another country. Now, at that time, life was challenging. We lost everything during the war. My parents tried to get jobs. My dad was employed, but when you have a refugee paper, you have the lowest income. That happens everywhere. So that was the case. Even though my dad is a physician, yes, he worked. Money was enough to pay the rent, and sometimes not. No. Sometimes you had no food and all that. Overall, life was very challenging. So my parents thought, you know what? With the resettlement program, you can apply to be resettled in the country where you came from. And at that time, my dad was just from the USA. So he thought, I'm going to apply and then we'll transfer to the USA. That was a good idea. However, at that time, there was just a lot of things going on within the UN itself. So we missed that opportunity. And then all of a sudden, my parents got again a job with the UMC again, to go to Sierra Leone. So we moved to Sierra Leone, spent 9 years there. And then when the contract was done, we moved back to Kenya, and my mom continued with the refugee program. Yeah, she kept her papers. When we moved to Sierra Leone, my mom kept those papers, the refugee papers. And then when the contract was done in Sierra Leone, we went back to Kenya. She continued the process. Now, another thing that you should know is that the resettlement program is very complicated, in the sense that when you apply as a family, it takes a very long time for the UN personnel to study your case, and then for you to be approved. You go through a series of interviews. So it discourages a lot of refugees, and then they apply in different groups. Say, my family is a family of 6. So if we wanted our program or our process to be faster and just very short, we will apply in 3 groups. So, for example, me and my sister apply for the resettlement program, and then my 2 brothers, and then my parents. That way, it will just take a few seconds, and then the UN will just fly us out of Kenya. But when we applied as a family, they take a long time to study our case and everything. That was why it was so good for us to go to Sierra Leone and then come back. That way, things went really fast. My parents tried to convince the UN that the USA was the best place, because my dad was just from the USA. We have friends and family there, But after the UN studied our case, we went through a series of interviews. They thought that the best place for my family was Saskatchewan, Canada. So here I am. On February 9th, 2014, the UN flew us out of Kenya. On February 10th, 2014, we landed in Saskatchewan, Canada. That's how I came to Canada. So one thing I also want to share is that if you are a refugee student and you already know the UN tells you that they're going to transfer you to Canada, I'm going to insist on this one. Tell your university or college that you're going to be transferred to Canada. Once you arrive in Canada, apply to the university or college of your choice, and then get in touch with the university or college back home. Tell them to send your transcript, because if you don't do that and you bring your transcript by yourself in person, it's going to be very, very tough for you. You're going to go through hell. Chances are they're not even going to look at your transcript. So just tell your university or college back home to mail it. Actually, they love when it's mailed. Mail it to your university or college. That's one thing. And then another thing, once you arrive in Canada as a government-sponsored refugee, I encourage you to go to the International Student Office. There's a lot of information for you there. Even though as a government-sponsored refugee, once you land in Canada, you get a PR. Don't be afraid to go to the International Student Office, because your experience is very, very similar to international students. You don't have the same accent as Canadians. Look at my accent. I don't have a Canadian accent. I'm a typical African. And then the culture is very different. Everything is going to be very strange to you. The food, everything. So when you go to the International Student Office at your university or college, you meet people who understand that you have a culture shock, and then you need time to adjust to the culture, to the system. So there are people who are patient and willing to hear from you and help you. That's the other advice. Now, back to the question. Yeah, I think I explained everything. Hopefully I answered your question, and thanks for watching.